You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Owen.
I'm Savage.
And I'm Scarr.
And we are here today to talk about the most header of topics, the most white space of thingies, the most weirdly organised of aspects of RPGs. That's layout. We're doing layout?
Yeah,
we're seriously discussing layout? All right,
layout of RPG books, yeah. Well, this is my hobby horse, because in a previous life, I was a graphic designer, and for some of this one as well. So, book layout is something I've kind of been groxing for a while, and I've always just kind of found the more I learn about, how RPG books work, or how RPGs work, core books especially, is kind of where we're going to constrain ourselves today, the more it has occurred to me that there's something deeply wrong with the kind of the fundamental unspoken assumptions that underlie most layout of RPG books. I think most core books, now this, and I should stress, this isn't actually a problem you'll find in D&D, because D&D has 3 core books, all of which have placed different demands on it in terms of layout. So we could talk about that some other time. I've got some ideas there too. But right now I think and this largely kind of comes from my exposure to many, many RPG core books throughout the 90s and early 2000s, and they all kind of have the same rhythm to them. So I'd like to let's pick that apart a little bit. I think there's things we're doing wrong in terms of how we organize the content in books, and there's things we're doing wrong in terms of how we lay out the content in books. So order and layout for core books only, because that's going to be about 300 pages. And you've got a lot to get in there. You've got a world of characters, themes, and all that sort of stuff to cram in there. Combat system, driving system, spell system, whatever it is. That's a lot to get in there, and so space is a premium. And I think there's an awful lot of space that is eaten up by easily written, but not terribly well thought through content.
Savage, are you looking primarily at modern layout here, or are you going to look at a historical perspective, going back to the old days of dense black text typed up in triple or quadruple columns and, on white paper, or what are we looking at?
Oh, bad old days are still with us. Take a look at Wolves of God. My word. I mean, can we talk about just an unrelenting stream of single column text with no tables, no diagrams, no nothing? It's just, oh my, how am I meant to find anything in here? How am I meant to even digest this information? And that book was released, what, a year ago? 2 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Year ago. So no, this stuff is still alive and with us. Hell, I'd take a Rifts book over that. But we can talk a little bit about just where it comes from, because I think most of it's still stuck there. Scarr, you gonna shoot me down?
No, I have to admit, for all that Kevin Crawford and his works have gotten all kinds of praise for their turning of old school rules into a very flexible thing that he applies like Marmite to so many genres. Layout of the books is probably one of the sticking points, in that there's so much stuff in there, so that's so very useful, but finding it can be a real pain. Like, one of the main reasons that I bought the physical copy of Stars Without Number is because it has the handy thing of having different coloured end pages, so I can actually tell the chapters apart. If it wasn't for that, I was relying on the very minimal index to the front. I don't think I'd be able to find anything in that book. It's a definite weakness of what's otherwise some of the really good creative projects that are in the indie scene today. And there's this, I also think back, one of my projects of the last couple of months has been reading through the original first edition Dungeon Master's Guide by Guy Gax himself, and it's like the antithesis of laid out. It's like stream of consciousness, just like like he clearly went back over it a few times. That was merely to add extra $5 words to every paragraph. He didn't reorder it. Like apparently one of the major challenges that they had in designing the second ed DMG was like just clipping out the pages like coupons in each section of the book and just rearranging them to something vaguely coherent. So like, it's definitely a weakness that afflicts a lot of generally really well considered books. Is like the layout and the way things are presented is not optimal.
So Owen, maybe we should just define the core book. What's a core RPG book in terms of a setting and rules?
If you're looking at a single issue core book, which is basically like, this is all the rules for playing the game, GMing the game, all the stats for the monsters, all in one jobby, you could define a core book as that. Though some people would argue that it's fine to have the bestiary separate, or it's fine to have the DMG and the bestiary as separate books. But for this, you really want to look at all in one jobbies, yeah?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of because it has to have a little bit of everything in there.
So the ludicrous tight fist persons, yes, this is the one book you need to buy. You don't need to buy any other books. Everything is contained within this one book. Yeah.
Oh hell, for the longest time, all the games I played, I had the core book, and that was pretty much it. I didn't really even know there was anything else beyond that. So that's a predilection, kind of a weird kink in my upbringing. But yeah, I'd argue that a core book should be enough to go on for as long as your creativity remains, in the positive, or you run into some real roadblocks because it isn't in the book.
Gotcha. Okay, so we'll say that a core book is an all-in-one 300 to 450 page job covering everything you need to run your game.
Yeah, it's going to have the world, the kind of characters you can make, the kind of threats you should face, and then the mechanical sort of underpinnings to back all of that up and resolve it. Here's the fluff and the crunch in whatever mix you like. That's a core book. So generally, what we're going to see then, let's just picture, dear listeners, in your mind's eye. Let's do some mind's eye theater here. A big old dusty tome in front of you, and you crack it open. The pages start to flutter, cinema style, and we find ourselves at the world. Or no, more infamously, we're going to find ourselves at a page that is headed. So, what is a role-playing game? Like that's the first. It's on the first couple of pages of any book. Maybe you've just flicked past a piece of intro fiction, which was also popular back in the day. But there it is, front and center. So what is a role-playing game? It's going to be a few lines.
Yeah. This has always been like a bugbear of people because it's one of those things that is just relevant but redundant in equal measure, because every RPG book at least every RPG book that makes it into a physical form is going to be some poor country kid's first RPG book. So, like, to serve that poor soul and give them some context for whatever this tome of nonsense actually is not an unvirtuous goal. But yeah, it's like, as soon as like you have got your second RPG book of whatever stripe you have, then this section is sort of redundant. I would tend to err on the side of leaving it in. But then again, now I think about it, I'm pretty sure that my first proper RPG book, which was, I believe, the Advanced Fighting Fantasy book, didn't have such a section, although I do remember that I had the third of the Advanced Fighting Fantasy books first, rather than the actual mainline one, and I was sort of back calculating what the hell this was from that. So maybe I'm just a little biased and thinking wrongly about this, but you know, for me, I think like it makes sense to leave it in, just to be, you know, help the poor person trying to figure out what the hell your book is about.
Well, it's usually not very well written.
Well,
you know,
I know, no disagreement there.
You know, so then we'll go past that. And we're probably going to get we'll come back to all this, but we go past that. We get to the world of spell tech, or whatever the game you're playing is. So in the world of spell tech, this is the world that takes place in this kind of time and place, and the major movers and players in spell tech are this stuff and some of this stuff. And your players will engage in games of such and such in the world of spell tech. Players? Oh, sugar. Okay, now I guess I better create a player, a character. And then we get character creation. And then things get a little choppier after that. So we've got intro, we've got the world of lore stuff, character creation, and then we'll usually move on to probably the combat system, which could be a fairly chunky bit of the book, and then possibly other sort of skill resolution mechanics, whatever particular predilection that the writer's working on. You know, is it this kind of skill mechanic or that kind of skill mechanic? At that point, we stop for a shopping trip because now we need to equip everybody. So, again, depending on the kind of the crunchiness of the book, we're probably going to have maybe 20 to 40 pages of primarily weapons, some armor, some other equipment. But it's mostly going to be weapons. I'd say there's like an 80-20 rule at work there. The world of spell tech obviously has tech and then it has spells. So if you've got a magic system, best we do that now, and there'll be a kind of a fairly lengthy explanation of why the magic system is completely different from any other skill or system resolution that we've encountered so far. And then reams. I mean, if you're going to have a spell system, you might have everything in there. So let's budget for another 20 to 30 pages of spells. Once we're done with all of that, we still hear this is all character side stuff. We'd better we're going to need maybe some vehicle rules, if you're a spell hacker, you're going to need some spell hacking rules. That's another couple of systems that we'll stick in there. But they're by no means going to get anything like the amount of space we've given over to combat or equipment lists. All of that done, it's time to think about the poor sod behind the GM screen. They're going to need something to run off. So here's probably some antagonists, a bestiary, some locations. Maybe we dive into the faction politics of the world. Maybe not. Maybe we're not going to get ourselves too tied down. And I suppose once all that's said and done, there's probably enough space for advice on running the game. Here's a bunch of the optional rules that we're presenting the core book but don't necessarily expect you to use. That's going to be maybe 5-10 pages. If it's the 90s, there was probably an introductory scenario, some maps, and a character sheet for your players so you can legally photocopy and have your players fill out. And we're done. Does that sound about right?
Sounds about right to me.
There will often be some advice and rewards. There'll be some advice on...
Treasure table, yeah, you're right.
Maybe a little bit about adventure design in fairly slapdash form. But yeah, that's most of it. You missed out on potentially the terrible intro fiction, which is the first couple of pages of the book. Not for everybody, but they're commonly enough to...
I skipped over.
To happen.
I wanted to get to that jab at what is a role-playing game pretty quickly. So that's the way a lot of core books are laid out, and frankly, it sucks. I think, can we think of any problems there? I might have hinted at a couple.
Okay, well, fundamentally, core books are textbooks, right? Yeah. So, if you're looking at it from an education, they are textbooks. They're there to teach you how to play the game. They're a teaching document.
They are technical documents. Yeah.
Yeah. So they need to be organized and presented like a technical document. And there's a bunch of tricks around technical documents, which are there's a reference trick thing, right? Where art's really expensive in RPGs because art's expensive. But if I want to do if I'm doing, let's say, a chapter on the atom in a science textbook, I need to include diagrams to help students associate certain areas of the book with certain pieces of information, and so they can find it a bit quicker, and they remember, that bit about neutrons is beside that picture of the neutrons bouncing off the protons, or the neutron splitting into a proton and electron. That's the bit that's in the book. So people sometimes use art properly in RPGs, which is an association to go, that bit about melee combat, there should be a guy swinging a sword at another guy on that page to kind of anchor in your memory to go back to that page. Yeah, that was where they were discussing melee combat. You don't just put it in to put it in. You put in art as a teaching and learning aid so that people can associate with that and return to that bit of the book. There was something about attacks when someone's running away from somebody else there, and there's a bit where someone's getting stabbed in the back as they attempt to run away from combat. There are teaching aids that are done. That is done sometimes in RPGs. Sometimes it is not done because people don't know why you do that, and sometimes it's done because people don't have the money to pay for art. But that's one thing that is important.
Yeah. So, okay, so that we're getting into layout. It's just all valid, all good.
Yep.
But the order in which we present this information, even if we present it badly, I feel is the first place to start. Let's move some of those chunks around.
This is sort of a sizzle or steak argument.
What do you offer up first? Yeah. Well,
so do you want people to be working on rules first and building the character as they go, or do you want to sell them on the book first? It's just there's a lot of our
well, that's what
that little piece of terrible intro fiction, we malign so much. That's usually just the execution of that is almost certainly terrible because most RPG writers are not terribly great fiction writers. They might be great behind the DM screen, but they are not. They are not good at being profound on a technical sense. But they are trying something. They're trying to inspire the person who has flipped the cover to say, "Oh, I want to do the things that is in this fiction. This fiction is telling me what is in the game," but that's not. Different people learn differently is one of the issues. Is some people need to be sold by the book because they've seen it in the store, and then you open up, look at the front cover, and see what's inside. And some people have already been sold on the premise of the game by their mates or their game master or whatever.
Yeah. All right.
And need to be sold.
Shane.
In what way?
So, because we can't just start with, we can't reduce this to, maybe they don't want to learn or not, or they learn differently. Doesn't matter. You got to lay the book out. So you've got the chunks of the book. Which way round do they go? Do you think it's correct now, or do you think something else should happen? You can't assume you're going to be able to tailor it for everybody in all respects. Some people are going to struggle with it no matter what you do. I think we've got a problem with books as they are. I think they present the information incorrectly and in the wrong order. Why are we creating characters before we've learned how to use them? Why isn't the combat section first? Or why isn't all the lore up front? And then we do the mechanical stuff at the back. What's... Yeah.
I'm of the opinion that the sizzle pitch should be the first couple of pages because you've got to get people excited to read the rest of your textbook. I think that's where you start with the high level concept of what the game is about. Get people excited with the idea of we can play this and we can do that, and then that has to be first, I think, because if you launch immediately into rules, most people will get upset and not buy your game. Because the first couple of pages of your book also serve as your sales pitch. That the start of your sales pitch is the cover. Then it's the first couple of pages of art and kind of stuff to intrigue you and get you to invest in the game. And then you get into the rule stuff. I think that's how you have to do it.
Okay.
At least for the first section.
Yeah,
but that's
so
just me.
We've got to have some stuff up front. But once we've got people invested, and I actually happen to like the little sort of intro fictions. I think Slay Industries probably does them best of all because they keep them real short, they keep them in character voice, and they're usually selling a perspective on the world. So I think that's kind of useful. It illustrates that there's different people in this world who see it differently and have their own kind of stuff going on they want to tell you about. I'd probably put a bunch of maps up front along with the sizzle and give people a real broad view of what's going on in your world. Is it a world of kingdoms? Is it a world of city-states? Is it a world of vast wilderness that needs to be explored? Get that up front and center, so that's easy to find, and it gives you the broadest possible perspective on the world before you start drilling down. And this is going to be kind of the center of my thesis, is that you need to present broadly and then drill down to specifics when you're laying out books like it, especially these kind of technical manuals, because it's got to be easy to find generally what you're looking for, and then it should lead down to the specific thing you need. But yeah, like I think once we got the sizzle out of the way, you should probably give a primer on combat and skill resolution before you teach people how to make characters. Because if you build characters without knowing how the system's going to work, you're going to build jank-ass characters that don't work, and you're going to be really disappointed and annoyed. You're going to wonder, like, why the hell did they give me all these stupid choices that I'd never make if I knew what the hell was going on? And of course, this all assumes we're reading linearly. Of course, it's a technical manual. We are going to be jumping after the first pass. You're always going to start jumping back and forth.
But the first pass is possibly the most important.
Possibly, yeah. Well, the GM's going to read it and teach everyone else how to play. So it should be a good technical resource for teaching people how to play. That's my other kind of poll here, is that these books are generally not friendly towards someone who's trying to teach someone else the game. As Owen pointed out there near the top, we need a lot more information laid out in a way that is easy to digest at a glance and easy to use as a training or teaching tool. And that means diagrams. I don't care how much nice art you put in your book, you better have a ton of diagrams that show me how movement on the battle grid works, or how the layout of cards to resolve social encounters should be done, tarot style, or river poker. I can't remember the name, but Texas Hold'em style poker, something like that. Put in lots of demonstrations of how play aids are used on the table, or diagrammatically show me a flow. Like, how many times why do we read 2-column text to learn combat systems? Surely flow charts and lookup tables and random scatter tables, whatever, would all be much more useful in terms of showing people how combat works than double-ass columns of heading, subheading nonsense with a few tables.
If you do an actually comprehensive flowchart, depending on your game, it can make things look very complicated when they're actually pretty simple in play. But the flowchart, when you actually account for everything, makes it look like there's a lot going on. And then people will post on Twitter about it and make fun of you. Which, that sounds stupid, but I've watched it happen several times. And someone's like, I should not have to look at a flowchart to know your player game. And everyone clapped. I was like,
oh, those people are idiots.
What a weenie.
Yeah.
What a weenie.
But
those weenies get traction. You got to be aware of that.
They're never going to buy your game. I want the people who buy the game. I'll let my marketing department figure out how we get people to buy the game. But I want the people who buy the game to be able to understand how combat works quickly without having to search through reams and reams of text. Because combat's it's a staged, gated kind of system. It's if, when, if, then, yes, no. That's really, really easy to demonstrate using things like flowcharts, and really bloody hard to explain using the Kevin Crawford ream of text method. I don't know how the man keeps being asked to write books. Or get them
He's self-published.
Oh, there
he
you go.
Published it himself,
The refuge of every scoundrel. I'll do it myself. Okay, so combat, and let's try and get some synthesis between combat and skill resolution. Chopping them all up. That's
more game design than layout, though. That's
so I guess I can't really go there.
Typically,
I'd have to have some good answers.
Core mechanic, non-combat skill stuff.
Yeah.
Combat skill stuff flowing into damage and probably other bad stuff related to damage, and then maybe some recovery stuff. That's usually the workflow on that one, and that's okay.
It's okay.
Because combat into damage into recovering from damage is a fine workflow for reading, at least.
Yeah, it's
and it makes a reasonable workflow for referencing. Because at least you can go, Cool. That's that. Awesome.
And what I want there is I want the book to fall open on those pages that I use most to run that stuff. And for there to be just a big 1 or 2 page spread that is the core idea presented as simply as possible in a way that I can find what I need at a glance. And you can spend the next 12, 18, 22, whatever pages digging into the nuances of that, but there should be combat resolution. Boom. There's a big ass page I can put down on the table, show everybody, learn myself, keep myself on track.
So instead of an appendix, you're suggesting that the book should just sort of open in the middle, and that should be your ersatz DM screen, essentially, of most useful tables.
Not so much. I want there to be several pages like that, where it's, here's the system, here's how it works. Hell, put places to put dice on to keep track of stuff or whatever. Eventually you'd probably print them off, lammy them, get a custom playmat made of them, whatever. But it's once you put them all together, it is a dashboard for running combat or running skill resolution or running, alchemy or whatever it is your game is focused on. But have those dashboard pages that I can, if I'm so inclined or if I feel a little less confident about the system, I can just have them there in front of me and run with them. Because they're a good teaching aid when I need to sort of see the shape of the thing, and then they're a good play aid when I need to actually get down to it. And they're a good sort of general overview. Not everything's going to be on there. It's a very sort of high-level view. But I think that's a place where diagrams and flowcharts or just a dashboard approach would be very useful for each of those sort of things that Owen's identified.
I'm more suggesting it should be in the middle of the book, so that when you open the book, it doesn't snap the spine in half if you're trying to do it at the very back. Well, it depends on whether you're hardcover and softcover, I suppose.
Should the book be a ring binder or whatever? No, there's certain physical limitations we're not going to get around. It's very hard to sell people on ring binder books or spiral bound books. They look cheap and nasty. It's going to be a perfect bound hardcover because that's what people buy. They like to see them on the shelves, nice thick spine, and it looks good, and all the writing runs the right way. If your graphic designer knows what the hell they're doing, so that they all line up and the imprint is there. But it at least informs you that, hey, there's a page in this book that covers a basic combat resolution, and I can, and maybe there's one maybe in the deluxe edition, it's a separate thing I can fold out in front of me. But it gets the information across in a way that's useful, helpful to certain kinds of learning, and then useful at the table. Will the book actually fall flat? Probably. Or open flat? Probably not. They never do. You go crack the spines, your Slay first edition or second edition explodes. Who else had really bad printing and binding?
The Explorer Edition one wasn't great, but it was super cheap and really easy to replace, so most people didn't care.
Yeah. But if you're the kind of person who likes to just mash those pages flat, then you've at least got a reason to do so, because there's a useful thing there. Okay, can we? We're gonna. I'm probably going to wrap this up, I'd like to say,
really.
Go.
I feel like we've barely gotten started.
I know, it's terrible, isn't it?
I've got a couple 2 weird points. One is calling questions something both of you guys said, and one is my own particular thing. Which do you want to go through first?
Attack, then defend.
Okay. So there's something you guys said, and I agree, and that's you both said.
You know when you're ready.
Yeah.
You both said that the purpose of RPG core book is to teach, and that is true, but that is not the only purpose of an RPG book, core book. I think there's 3 main functions of RPG books. One is teaching the game. One is acting as a reference manual to the game, which is a slightly different thing. And the third is to act as inspiration for the game. And I think a lot of the problems with layout and stuff is that trying to balance all 3 of those, because yes, if you want someone to learn something, it really helps to have things laid out in a certain way so that you have that natural flow from what is this book to, oh, I know how to run the game now. But reference manuals tend to work less on flow so much as organization. And it's less about one point leading to the next, as in each point being distinct and findable. And
yeah, you'd have to organize, just to toss in there. If you are organizing things as a learning thing, you can put the core, like a core mechanic resolution thing in the first text, the first paragraph, and the 15th paragraph, you can have a specific thing, like say the terror rules is at that point. And if you read through it as like learning, you'll read the first point, you'll remember, then you read the 15th point, remember to look back, and that's grand. But if you're referencing, you look at the 15th point, because that's what's going to show up in the index, and you then have to know to refer back to the first point, or the first paragraph, to actually get the full context for how you handle something. It crops up in a bunch of different RPGs where the reference in the rules isn't actually that helpful, because you need to actually go back and read a chunk of the previous paragraph, or the previous couple of paragraphs, to get the full context.
Yeah, and like one little trick I like seeing where in some books is when the margins have sort of page references to other rules, so you can sort of jump forward or jump back if you need context for something. But that requires big margins, and it's not always feasible.
There's a kind of RPG player runner who really likes big margins because they want to write stuff in. They're gonna have their own kind of thoughts, so they maybe want to home rule something. Home rule? Yeah, that makes sense. Or it's a good place to stick those references. I think the Dresden Files book had a bunch of kind of in character explanations of rules that stuck in the margins, or just observations on, hey, this cool thing you can do with this rule if you got your head on right is maybe not something that everyone's got to think of. So it's a good place for asides. I think nice big margins and lots of diagrams, things like that are absolutely. I actually don't really have a problem with double column. I know I was slamming it there for a while, but I think double column is a pretty useful way to lay out a lot of information. You want short sentences because there are short lines of text. They're easier to parse quickly because you've got 300 pages to read. Yeah. Make it easy. But yeah, big fat margins that aren't necessarily blank and have plenty of different uses, especially for linking ideas. Mm-hmm. And then Owen, as you're talking about, like, man, indexes for these are going to be hard to write anyways. Yeah. But well worth. I mean, they're a godsend when they're well done.
Yeah. We'll come back to that in a second. The other thing was inspiration, and the idea that the act of reading the book should make you want to start designing stuff for the book and want to run the game. And, well, this isn't as much a layout thing. This is something that it's less about laying it out and more that inserting care into what you're doing. Is that, like, you want your reference material to be clear, but you don't want it to be dry. I think there needs to be a bigger emphasis on like inspiring examples of play. Like this is something like, and very often you sort of just, you see the font turning to italics to show that this is how you resolve this skill. And it's just like, it's some stuff you just can't skip over it. I think that might need to be more eye-catching on a piece-by-piece level. It's just like, the reason we have this rule in the book is so you can do this cool stuff or this in-genre stuff or, and it also refers to the mixing of fluff and crunch. Like, we've sort of implied there's this kind of hard break between, well, this is how we lay out all your rules material so you learn it, but you also need to lay out all your setting material so you learn and digest that, but also that you can reference it later when you require something to say, well, what happens in the bubbly dumbly system? Oh, it's got black holes in it. That sounds cool. And there's 3 different corporations there. Okay, I could do something with that. It's just like, basically these 3 core functions of the book, learning, reference, and inspiration, all need to be sort of interwoven. You can't leave any of them out, otherwise the whole will suffer.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and you're right. It is those 3 core pillars that every book has to hit and build up. Otherwise, you don't have a great core book.
And I just want to say one last thing. Is just like we've been saying it all over the episode, but I really do think indexing is sort of the key. Like it is something I've noticed in the few RPGs that actually put in an end index at the start of, not just the start of the book and then the big index at the back. Those like, first off, if your front of the book index is just, this is the list of chapters, you've failed. No, spend an extra page or two, like breaking down, this is the what's in each chapter, and this is where you want to go for things. And I really do think, I know this is probably heavy in page count, but have each chapter also have either a start of chapter listing of what's in that chapter or a end of chapter summary, so that you can refer back. It's just,
that's pretty cool.
Just to make the thing.
That ain't gonna happen, Shane. That's gobbling word count. Gobbling it. You know? It's just brutal. Like, you'd be looking at adding on probably 10-20% of the length of the book doing that.
I know. Well, that's something that's easier in the modern area when you have indexable PDFs, and a lot of this can be invisible. It's just like you click on the front of the book and it'll bring you straight to what you want. But we're mainly still talking about physical books, and I don't think physical books are going anywhere anytime soon.
No.
And any book that does something like this, that has extra indices or just a really clear index, I just find them immensely easier to use.
Okay, listen, we're gonna keep cracking on here. Owen, 40 pages of equipment. What's wrong with this? Or is there anything wrong with it? People do like to shop.
Depends on the game. Some games will sell themselves as a gear porn game, and as such, they are going to want a pile of gear. Like with certain games, you want that many pieces because that's a big part of the equipping your character and the power fantasy of the game, and yada yada yada. Would it be nice to wait for a specific gear book? Sure, but then some players will complain, I didn't get the full. I can't get the full gun experience. Like, you're making a 40k game, unless you started out all the basic 40k weapons in your thing, people will get upset. So you will tend to end up putting together a big gear section. For other games, you don't need a big weapon section. It depends on the game. But if you're crunchy at all and you want options and you want a spear to fight differently to a dagger, then you're probably going to need a big gear section.
Yeah, I think it is a case of it's got to fit the game. And there's plenty of games where it's nice to have a whole bunch of stuff. I think the focus on weapons is a bit unfortunate. There's lots of other ways to solve problems, but not if the only thing you're selling is hammers. It's nail time all the time. So I'd like to see gear sections that pull away from the 80-20 in terms of weapons versus equipment. Detail more equipment. Give me more subsystems in equipment that are ideally detailed there in the equipment section, so that I can apply them when I'm looking at that bit of gear, or I can cut it out and tack it onto my my character sheet. Spell lists the same. Here's my big takeaway for all of this, gear and spells. I know we're going to compress all. We're going to finish this episode now. We don't have time. Give me less rote stuff. I don't want 40 odd pages of either, but I do want 10 pages of how to make this stuff. Give me systems that create gear. Give me systems that create spells. Give me that I can figure out, oh look, I don't have 3 different shotguns spec'd out in this book, but I have the rules that I can spec 40 different shotguns if I really feel shotguns are that important, or different kinds of spells. Give me those kinds of things instead of long rote lists of sort of fixed gear. Because maybe I want the world to evolve, maybe I want there to be trends in manufacturing or fashion or spell research or whatever. So give me systems to create those things rather than, here's a bunch that we kind of half thought about, they're not particularly well balanced, off you go. So on that, give me rule systems for equipment, etc. Shane, kick it in the teeth.
I think we've covered most of it. Like, I could list off my usual overwritten list, but I think these are the main things. This is like.
Do you like spell lists?
No, no. Sorry, I thought we were completely finishing up here. Spells, equipment lists, that kind of thing. don't put them in because you see other games putting them and think that's the only way to do it.
Yes.
Really, really think about, does my RPG need 50 different shotguns or 7 different ways to set a man on fire with magic? It's just like focus on what is needed for your game first, and then figure out what consumer content is going to be vital. Put that in, and, invalidating future supplements aside, as systems for generating content are often more useful to a GM than systems than just lists of content. Although it depends on the information density of your particular.
And again, this is. I mean, if you're going to try and teach someone something complicated, like here's how to spec out a tank or whatever, again, go with diagrams, whatever, teach it, or a dashboard kind of feature to allow them to build these things so that they'll work with your system. Are you afraid that you're giving away the secret sauce and now suddenly no one needs to buy, equipment catalog number 4? No, most people don't have the time. I certainly have good examples of equipment spells, whatever, but the creation rules aren't going to lose you any sales because most people are going to build a few of their own and go, that's fine, but there's a big grimoire of spells coming next month. I'm probably going to pick it up because I don't have time to build 100 spells. But don't put them in. Don't stuff your core book with them. It's bloat, and no one. It's not really that much more useful than, the same page count, but with a much more in-depth explanation of why your spells work this way, why the mana costs are calculated this way. It's going to make your systems make a lot more sense to people when you crack the hood and show them some of the moving parts on how this system actually works. Because let's face it, a lot of that stuff is where system designers hide an awful lot of inadequate design by pumping out the results of their spell creation or their gear creation systems without ever showing you how they work. So give me, it's a tighter section, it's got less clunky stuff written in it, and it kind of forces the game to be better because your system has to work for people who aren't the designer if they're going to get something out of it. Right. What does that leave us with?
The rest is just stuff like how much art you should have in your game, how much is white space okay? I generally kind of find that I'm more forgiving of white space because I don't like big blocks of text. But I'm the kind of person who likes bullet points.
Yeah. So as a graphic designer, you probably imagine I'd be all in favour of great layouts with lots of art. I think plenty of art is good, but it doesn't necessarily belong in all of the sections of your book. I would argue that you should probably keep any sort of visual representations to infographics or dashboard stuff or charts or whatever in the system sections. Because the trend these days is to flow your text around a nice piece of artwork that kind of cuts in and out. So you get these weird organic shapes around the art. It's fine. I think you'd be much better off because you do it to avoid the white space problem. Every page is full, right? I would much prefer if you come to a point where you've got a quarter page over. If there's any organizations in the game or any brands or anything like that, fill that space with a nice, clear, potentially sort of copyable and usable elsewhere logo or a house mark or a weird sigil of abjuration or whatever it is, that because people who are running your games are going to be hunting around for ways to kind of spice up the stuff that they're making. Most people run games got a few handouts, whatever. So if I had the mark of the House of the Ox somewhere in the book, and it's marked as such, little byline says this is the official mark of the House of the Ox, and I'm running a House of the Ox adventure. I've got that now that I can use it. I can Photoshop it into a document, or I can kind of copy it and know that it's going to be more or less right on the cover of a book they find or whatever. That's a useful piece of world building, and it's a useful use of the space that you don't necessarily, give it plenty of space around it. You run out of things to say on the subject of spell creation or whatever. Just put those marks in. And probably, if you're not going to do that, then have all of those kind of logo graphic style things, be they house banners or corporation logos or heraldry for different schools of magic. Put them all somewhere in the book as a handout or as a sheet you can use somewhere down the line to reference or to show, just to illustrate them all in one place that you can use them. But I think they're good space fillers. I think people who buy your book are going to get a lot more out of something like that than a picture of a House of the Ox wizard battling a golem that's kind of jammed into the text, and it's all kind of flowing around as a magic blast, whatever. Looks great, it's nice, but I think there's better ways to use game art. I think there's better ways to use your page space instead of, because the picture's nice to look at, but it makes it harder to read whatever you're reading, and it cuts into the usefulness of that page. That's where I am on that.
One related question. White background or semi-arty background? Do you want your text to pop, or do you want your pages to be inherently interesting?
You got me there. I think if I was being strict, I'd say it should probably be white. But you better have a lot of the essence of your game oozing out of every other piece of layout, be it the page borders or the way that the number is kind of encapsulated, or the headings or the box outs or the asides or something else. If it's a fantasy style game, then give me some nice script or something cool that's sort of part of the layout. Maybe there's a sort of a stylized sword or staff or whatever that runs under the subheading or the heading of the chapters. If it's a future game, give me some crazy box outs that have kind of angles cut out, or something that sells me, maybe circuitry or whatever running through the board or things like that. You should probably, for ease of reading, you should probably have black text on white. But that doesn't mean the page has to look boring. It just means that it's much easier on people who are trying to scan a page to find information. Personally, I kind of like 3.5 and the full color print approach. I think it really helps to evoke the feeling of a game. But it's, it can get in the way of, they had all these underlines, copybook underlining under a bunch of stuff. It was okay, but it wasn't great. I think, to answer the question, I think it should be plain white, maybe with some stuff going on the borders, but make sure all the other elements of your page layout really sell the game, the world of the game, or whatever it is you're trying to get across. And don't be afraid to change it up. Keep the technical stuff really clear and stark, and then get crazy with your layout and stuff in the fluff pages. Maybe that's a great place for art to kind of get a bit more flowy and weird. It's a good place to kind of stick in skeuomorphic sort of, someone stuck a post-it note in here, or they've slipped in a bookmark or whatever. Have fun there. Again, it helps to sell the book, because you're probably making a mistake if the same rules of layout apply all the way through your book, no matter what you're doing. But I think it shows a lot more thought and care and attention and purpose if the technical stuff is technical and really clearly so, and that the world building stuff is a little more gribbly. Whoa, I've got a lot to say on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so everyone left by now. Well, Owen had to leave us. He's got some other stuff to do, so that's why he's not available to jump in on some of this and tell me why I'm dead wrong. But that's fine. I can do this with an audience of one. Where does that leave us? Oh, the adventure. I actually think an intro adventure is really important. Not enough books do it now. There's the classics. The Haunted House is the one that comes at Call of Cthulhu. Did Woofrup have one? Original Woofrup? I think it did. Can't remember.
I cannot remember either.
It's another teaching aid. It should be teaching prospective writers. This is how we lay out adventures. It should be teaching GMs this is a prototypical scenario for our game. You can run it in about 3-4 hours with maybe 4 or 5 people, and it should show off a little bit of everything about the world. Probably not what you're going to run every week, but it's the intro. It is the sizzle you were talking about. I mean, I know it's sizzled, but I think it's fine at the back of the book, because it's really, if the whole rest of the book is the dress rehearsal, it's the moment when the curtain goes up and both the GM and the players step out and do their thing with everything they've learned. So at the back is fine. What else? Subsystems. I think put all your system stuff together. Stop putting the combat system as right after the character creation system, and then have pages and pages of equipment and shopping lists and spell lists, and then get to other subsystems. All that stuff has to come up and sort of live together, because you can lay it all out the same way, and you can show how it all interacts properly, and you're not breaking the flow of your reader's attention. Put all the shopping list stuff in appendices. Maybe have your gear or spell creation up there alongside the systems and subsystems, and then have all the shopping list stuff in the back, down near the index, because that's like, you're not going to read the whole spell list through. You're going to go looking for the one you need. Right. Do you want to do any more on this, or are we done?
I think we've gone over the main points. Like, I could give you more prompts, but I feel like that's just going to set you off again. Yeah.
Okay. That's my... I had to get that off my chest. Now, I'd like to return to this, because I've got a lot to say about monster manuals and actual shopping books and a whole bunch of other stuff.
I feel like I have a version for the Dungeon Master's Guide, the red-headed stepchild of the 5e core rules.
It's terrible,
but that's a future episode. There's also possibly an entire different episode on PDFs and how their layout should be different because of all the funny tricks they have. But that, again, another day.
Yeah, I've been working a fair bit with PDFs and even just... Look, it's all kind of wiki style, right? PDFs are a poor kind of go-between, but what you're really going for is kind of D&D Beyond style rules presentation, which... love it or hate it, I think it really works. I'd say if I was involved in creating an RPG today, I could do worse than look at how they kind of break things down and present it. And sometimes they're presenting the same information, just reflowed in different ways, because it suits one learning experience better, or one use case better this way than that way. The monster entries are probably key one there. You can go and read all about how hags work and then find their stat blocks on one type of page in D&D Beyond, but in another type you just get the stat blocks and very little of the ecology stuff. And that makes perfect sense. It's the same information we presented, but cut up different ways and presented differently, because it's more useful to just be able to see the stat blocks sometimes. Sometimes you want to see the inline pictures and see the whole kind of narrative spiel about them. That's so yeah, PDFs are fine, and I take your point about being able to hyperlink. I think you're right. I think there should be sub kind of content pages at the starter chapters. Again, that idea that you get the general overview and then you get to drill down. Advice for dungeon masters or game masters or storytellers, whatever you're calling them in your particular flavor of game. It's probably always going to be better served as a separate book, but don't write general advice. Write really specific advice, because it's your game. It's not generally games masters would do this or that, or run a session 0 or whatever. Write really specific tricks for your dungeon master to use that works with your systems that you've spent all this time telling them about. But then we're back into game design.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, take us out, buddy.
Game writers, pay attention to your layout. We have fellow veteran party member SavageMick will be more than happy to talk you deaf about other things. And then when you're recovering from your loss of one of your primary senses, you can spend that extra energy focusing on designing your book better. But anyway, we have laid out our entire rules of making books. So for now, this party's over.
You've been listening to The Adventuring Party. We're a ragtag collective of desperate souls, striving for truth in a world of tabletop gone mad. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter. You can email us at party@theadventuringparty.net. Although, between you and me, the best place to track us down is Discord. Check the show notes for a link. This podcast released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license, which is like free, but with extra steps. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next week. Okay, I didn't really lay out my argument really well. I got hung up on some stuff there. You should probably have two separate indexes. One for the technical system stuff, and one for all of the world stuff. Like, it literally is that clear. Like, Fluff and Grudge. I don't want to have to look for Shooting Rule, Sisters of Silence, Stealth, and then don't mix them all up together. It's much easier for me to find. Probably, I'm not even sure I'd lay the... Hey, we gotta stop? Well, think about it. Just lay out your system rules alphabetically, lay out your fluff... So not your system rule, your system index alphabetically, lay out your fluff index in a kind of tiers or organizations or hierarchies or whatever, regions or whatever. Do that instead. That's probably better. Okay, we'll stop now. Goodbye, everybody. This is going after the credits.